Hello, and welcome to this week's reflections on the Revelation to John. And we are currently in chapter 6, and I think we've primarily made it through 1 through 11. And I finished up talking about the prayer of the righteous for justice. How long, O Lord, will you allow this to go on? Kind of a prayer, which is not unusual throughout the rest of what we call the Bible, the Old and the New Testaments. So we shouldn't be shocked in that sense, although I left you with this idea that, kind of a side note, that before praying that Jesus come and bring justice, like the prayer that we talked about last week, we need to understand that that includes us. When Jesus brings justice, it will include us. And we need to consider, are we personally prepared to face Jesus' justice? Or are we only interested in some kind of retribution? Like when somebody gets what you think they deserve, that's karma. Karma is getting them. That's not the way karma works, but okay. If you're only interested in some kind of personal retribution against someone that you may not like, or against someone for them saying something you didn't like, and Jesus' justice is not for you, okay? Jesus' justice is not our personal retribution. It's not like people claiming karma gets somebody. Jesus' justice is brought against the entire world all at once. That's the point of Revelation. So that's about where we stopped, and just a few more thoughts before we move on to chapter 6, verse 12. In the context of the opening of the 7 seals, the martyr's prayer is simply a prayer for a series to continue to its appointed end. So once you start opening the seals, the prayer is to continue on through the end of opening the 7 seals. It has the same function as the 4 living creatures' repeated summons to the 4 horsemen to come. The series will indeed continue, although the immediate answer to the prayer is a kind of temporary measure, if you will. Each of the martyrs is given a white robe and is told to wait a little longer until the number of their co-workers or their siblings in Christ who are yet to be killed because of their faith, martyred, if you will, until that number has been complete, according to verse 11. So their number will be complete when that 6th seal is opened. And the white robes will enable John and us as readers to recognize these martyrs when we see them again in chapter 7. So this next section, we haven't finished chapter 6. But remember, chapters and verses were added much later, and basically to make reading easier, maybe Bible study easier, so I can cite chapter and verse for you. They weren't there originally. So this next section actually starts at what we call chapter 6, verse 12, and goes through chapter 7, verses 17, which is basically all of chapter 7. So starting with this one, if you haven't already done so, and you want to go back and read starting at chapter 6, verse 12, and read all the way through chapter 7, go ahead and pause the video. I'll wait, and you can read that section before we proceed. Oh, you're back. Okay. So it has become almost commonplace to view chapter 7 as an interlude or some kind of a parenthesis in the progressive opening of the seals, as if John were able to step outside of the sequence of the vision after chapter 6, verse 17, the end of chapter 6, and back into it again at the starting point of chapter 8, verse 7, completely considering chapter 7 just inserted in there as an interlude, when the seventh seal is finally opened. Perhaps that's because of the traditional chapter divisions that have contributed to the popularity of this theory. And again, we have to work from the idea that chapters and verses were not there to begin with. There is no division here when John wrote it. There's no evidence at all that there is such an interlude that some theologians try to put there. They hint at what this interlude might mean. So the phrase after this in chapter 7, verse 1 does not signal a whole new vision. It does not signal a change of the scene for John at this point any more than it does when it's repeated again in chapter 7, verse 9. Rather, the vision of the sixth seal continues. So what then does chapter 6, verses 12 through 17 contribute to chapter 7? In what sense can it be considered necessary background to the vision of the redeemed in chapter 7? The simplest answer is that chapter 6, verses 12 through 17 describe vivid detail of the judgment from which the deliverance is promised in chapter 7. We might even argue that chapter 6, verses 12 through 17 is simply introductory to the vision proper, which comes in chapter 7. If the fifth seal and the opening of that dealt with the suffering people of God looking to the day when their number of servants and their brothers and sisters in Christ would be completed, chapter 6, verse 11, it's natural that the sixth seal should continue the focus on that group and mark the completion of that number of people being added to their original number. So at this great day of wrath that comes and is kind of an introductory to chapter 7 chapter 6 verses 12 through 17. After a great earthquake, the sun turns black and the moon red like blood. The stars fall from the sky. The sky itself crumbles like a piece of paper. The mountains slide into the valleys and islands sink into the ocean. Survivors hide in caves and under rocks from more terrible disasters to come. And see, this kind of a concept of Jesus' second coming is why I say, to people who think, well, maybe he already came. No. Do you think you could miss that? Do you think anybody on the earth could miss when the sun turns black and the moon red like blood, when stars are falling from the sky, the mountains are crumbling into the valleys, islands sink into the ocean? Is it possible any single person on earth would somehow go, oh, I didn't notice? No. So it's not reasonable for some people to say, well, Jesus already returned and he took some folks back with him and he left us for some reason. The rapture, again, is not spoken about in Revelation. The word is never used. That's made up fiction for good storytelling. And this one here, it sounds like bad science fiction, doesn't it? I mean, not bad in the sense of poorly written, but bad in the sense of, whoa, this is terrible. This is really, really bad. Yet maybe we could ask, what's missing from this picture? What's missing from that idea? And maybe direct it toward John and his first century readers. The picture is not so strange to anyone who has read the Gospels. Jesus told the disciples that in those days, following that distress, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, The stars will fall from the skies and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. You can see that in Mark chapter 13, verses 24, 25, which I've included in the website, and also comparable to the other synoptic gospels, Matthew 24, 29, Luke 21, 25, and 26. All of those are part of what I've included on the website. Jesus immediately added that people will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Mark 13, 26, 27, Matthew 24, 30, 31, Luke 21, 27. And that's where that idea is coming from, that some rapture may have already happened and some folks are gone, but some aren't. That reading. But if you couple that with the other reading that we just finished in Revelation chapter 7, nobody would miss that. So these parallels show us what is missing from the description and the picture that Revelation draws for us. And what is missing is there is no coming of the Son of Man in the clouds. No gathering of his chosen ones from all over the world. John sees all these terrible events happening, heralding and accompanying the second coming of Jesus, yet not the second coming itself. Okay, I know I'm drawing a fine line there, but you don't see that here. You don't see the second coming here. You just see the distress. And remember I said we have to read this as it comes, not jump from here to chapter 21 or 22. So the prophecy given in chapter 1 verse 7, look, he is coming in the clouds, is almost, yet not quite fulfilled. And this scene echoes Zephaniah 1, 14 and 15, which again I've included in the website. The great day of the Lord is near. That day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of trouble and ruin, a day of darkness and gloom. What is striking in the book of Revelation, and strange perhaps to the modern reader, is that the wrath is the wrath of the Lamb, from verse 16. The slaughtered Lamb of sacrifice in the center of the throne is not a passive victim here. Rather, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. The Lamb's role in judgment should really come as no surprise, considering his equality and partnership with him who sits on the throne in the worship of the elders, living creatures and all of creation, according to chapter 5, verse 13. So from that point on, God and the Lamb never act independently, rather always in unison. And when they act together in judgment, the inevitable question will be, who can stand? Verse 17. So that takes us technically through what we call chapter 6. Although the last part of chapter 6 couples with chapter 7. So if you did not read chapter 6, verse 12 through chapter 7, you may want to pause the video at this point and do that section now together. The question, who can stand, has its answer in chapter 7, where John sees 4 angels standing at the corners of the earth to preserve a group of servants of our God from destruction, chapter 7, verses 1 and 3. And a countless multitude standing in the presence of God and the Lamb in chapter 7, verse 9. So there are indeed those who will stand in the great day of wrath, although they must be prepared and protected. In verses 1 through 17 of chapter 7, we hear about that infamous number 144,000. And we also hear about what John refers to as a countless multitude, if you will. So the first question confronting the reader in chapter 7, at least for me, is why is it so crucial to prevent any wind from blowing? Why should wind bring harm to the natural order? There is wind in a destructive scene just described in chapter 6, verses 12 through 17, although at that juncture, it's really John giving us an expression, if you will. The stars in the sky fell to the earth as late figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. So there, the wind, actual wind, did not figure into John's vision, although he used it metaphorically to compare something he had never seen before, stars falling from the sky, with something that was familiar to him, ripe figs falling from a tree. So there's a metaphor there for John to help us understand what he is seeing, but he can't describe because no one's ever seen it before. Even Jesus used fig trees as a metaphor for the approaching end of the world. Mark 13, 28 and 29. In Revelation, wind is factored into the imagery so that the fig tree is not sprouting leaves, it is losing its fruit and perhaps its leaves as well. John's beautiful, poetic image comes to life as a grim reality in chapter 7. The wind becomes part of the vision now, and a very real threat when John sees 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the winds of the earth to prevent any wind from blowing on the land or on the sea or any tree. All the disasters of chapter 6, verses 12 through 17, are now wrapped up in this single disaster of wind. Well, I can say that we who live along the seacoast or in an area subject to hurricanes and tornadoes, we may understand this text a little bit more as a life experience, maybe better than those who yearn for that refreshing breeze in the desert. Let me, if you don't already know, just let me say this. Even if you do already know, let me say it anyway. Wind speeds by hurricane category. Category 1, mile per hour wind speed 74 to 95. That will give us some damage. Category 2, mile per hour wind speeds 96 to 110. That's a little bit more extensive damage. Category 3, wind speeds per mile per hour 111 to 129. Devastation is in that. Category 4, wind speed mile per hour 130 to 156. Now we're looking at a catastrophe. If you haven't stood in that kind of wind, don't. That's all I got to say. And it's not just the wind might blow you. Be concerned about what else the wind is blowing. At 156 miles an hour, a stick can go right through you. A rock can knock your head off. Okay? Are you understanding a little better? Category 5, that's the top. Wind speeds mile per hour 157 and more. Like, the more often happens. It often gets to be more. And that is really catastrophic. Because at this point, trees can be uprooted, cars can go flying, houses can go flying, roofs, etc. It's no longer just worrying about whether or not you get hit by a stick. It's whether you get hit by a rock or a tree or a car or a building, a roof, etc. That is catastrophic. So category 5s are horrible winds. And that doesn't even count the flooding, the tornadoes, etc. So back to Revelation. This wind now is catastrophic wind. So here, as in the case of the first four seals, John's language echoes the prophecies of Ezekiel, where scattering to the winds was the culmination of the divine judgment. And that included plagues and famine and the sword and other things. So Ezekiel 5:12, I've posted that in the website as well. 1/3 of you shall die of pestilence, or be consumed by famine among you. 1/3 shall fall by the sword around you, and 1/3 will scatter to every wind, and will unsheath the sword after them. That's pretty drastic and catastrophic too. So these four angels, like the four riders in chapter 6, have been given something. The riders, they got the bow and the sword and the scales and the pestilence, etc. These four, standing at the four corners of the earth, have been given something, and in this case, what they are given is the power to harm the land and the sea by releasing terrible, category 5, if you will, wind from the four corners of the earth. Instead, they're actually told to hold the wind back, at least for the time being, in verse 1. And verse 2, it says, another angel. And envision something majestic here. Majestically ascending from the rising of the sun, it says in verse 2. And maybe what he's meaning is this angel is appearing in the east as the rising sun is in the background. So it's something very majestic, bright. And this angel commands the other four angels and supplies the reason for them to withhold the wind. He says, until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God, in verse 3. So once again, imagery is drawn from Ezekiel's visions, where a man clothed in linen was told to go throughout the city of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over all the detestable things that are done in it. Those so marked are spared the destruction that is threatening the city. And again, Ezekiel 9:4-6 is in your on the website in those notes. Also, I've included something from a piece that is included in earlier Jewish writings that's not part of what we call the Bible. It comes from something called the Psalms of Solomon, chapter 15, verse 6, and I've included this as well. It reads, "For God's mark is on the righteous for their salvation. Famine and sword and death shall be far from the righteous." Now, John does not claim that he saw this ritual of sealing the foreheads in his vision, only that he heard the number of those who were sealed, which is where the 144,000 comes in, from all the tribes of Israel. In chapter 7, of course, it lists all of those various tribes. Now, different denominational groups in every age have seen their group in John's 144,000. The number has become synonymous with those who are saved, or the elect, or the chosen. When denominational groups grow beyond that specified number, they often begin to interpret this part of Revelation symbolically rather than literally. It was fine when there were fewer than 144,000, but now we need more than 144,000 to be saved, so that's a symbol, not literal. Okay, let's stop playing those games. That's all I'm saying. In fact, there are clues within the text that a symbolic interpretation really is required, not optional. The number 144,000 is something John says he heard in verse 4. It's not something he saw. He never says, I was permitted to count the 144,000 for myself. There were 12,000, he was told, from each of Israel's 12 tribes, making up the 144,000. And he gives an order to that. Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin. The list in those verses is framed in verse 5 and then at the end of verse 8 that this was the group that was sealed against the terrors to come. Some translations don't have that language of being sealed there. Our New Revised Standard Version that I've been quoting does. John's list does not match exactly with any of the traditional lists of the tribes of Israel, either in the names or in the order of the names. So most conspicuous is a messianic or a distinctly Christian list that it begins with Judah, the ancestor of David, the ancestor of Jesus. And in other words, the root of David in chapter 5, verse 5, just as the elder's voice had announced earlier, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, chapter 5, verse 5. So now John heard a list of the tribes announced beginning with the tribe of Judah. It's a very Christian list. But in any case, however, what John immediately saw then, no longer just heard but saw, was something quite different than what was announced. Instead of the Lion of the tribe of Judah, he had seen a lamb, looking as if it had been slaughtered, in other words, sacrificed, from chapter 5, verse 6. And now instead of 144,000 from all of the tribes of Israel, John sees a great multitude that no one can count, from every nation, from all tribes, plural, peoples, plural, and languages, plural. In other words, from the whole world. All standing before the throne of God and in front of the Lamb, in verse 9. In each case, John's vision accomplishes a transformation. A lion is transformed into a lamb. 144,000 Jews are transformed into countless multitudes from every nation on earth. The great multitude, wearing white robes and holding palm branches in their hands, break out in worship of God and the Lamb in a manner recalling chapters 4 and 5, and are answered by the Amen of the angels standing around the throne and around the elders and around the four living creatures. So at this point, one of the elders, also familiar with from our reading of chapters 4 and 5, asked John, "These in the white robes, who are they? And where did they come from?" And John says, "Sir, you know." Basically, he's saying, "I don't know. Maybe you do." So he kind of denies that he has any knowledge of who they are. And the elder answers his own question. "These are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." Now that's a familiar kind of an imagery for us, of being washed in the blood for many Christians, many denominations. So I'm going to leave that there and let you consider all the things I've shared with you in my reflections today. If you haven't already done so, please go down below this video, click on the subscribe button, and maybe give me a thumbs up on that icon. And there's a formula that says that'll help us reach more people, which is great. Our YouTube channel subscribers is up to 380 almost, which astounds me. I never even thought we'd get to 100. So a lot of people are watching. A lot of people, I'm grateful for you. If you want to leave a comment or a question below in the comment section, also check the comment section to get that link to the website for these readings and resources I've been listing there. I would love to hear from you. If you're in the Sun City Center area at Sundays at 10 a.m., please, you're invited to join us in person for worship. If you can't be here in person, we do live stream on this YouTube channel, or later you can watch it as a recording. Thanks for joining me again as we continue on this journey through the Revelation to John. I hope you're having a great week. Take care. God bless.